Hi, my name is Brennan Jones. It's been a while since I've posted on this channel. First of all, I just want to say I am praying for everyone involved with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and I hope we can come to a peaceful resolution as soon as possible. I just want to remind everyone, if you enjoy the content, please like this video, as it would really help with the YouTube algorithm to push this content out to more and more people. First of all, let's talk about inflation and the forces that drive it. Inflation is when there is too much money chasing too few goods. Inflation is brought on by three factors. That is the money supply, money velocity, and GDP growth, where both money supply and money velocity must exceed our GDP growth. And right now we're starting to see a slowdown in asset prices and a continuation of the prices of food and energy, all of which I believe will end up in economic stagflation or even possibly hyperinflation. Money supply is then influenced by the creation of currency, or in other words, the creation of debt, as those two words are often interchangeable in a debt-based financial system. Factors that influenced the currency creation was the fact that governments were handing out money to their citizens to stay home during the health crisis, and the quantitative easing done by central banks around the world by buying back government bonds from commercial banks and improving the bank reserves in the commercial banking system. This can help the lending capabilities of those banks lend out into the economy, and the buying back of government bonds from non-bank entities and increasing their deposits at the financial institution that they reside at. Money velocity is the speed at which money exchanges hands between persons and entities in an economy. That completely changed at the start of the health crisis, as spenders then became savers, and a lot of the currency creation went into assets as opposed to goods and services. And we can see that in the housing markets, stock markets, and bond markets. GDP growth is the year-over-year growth of an economy. The world economy had a major GDP decline in the second quarter of 2020. And we managed to rebound from those lows, but now we're starting to see GDP growth slip in both Canada and the US. Both the Atlanta Fed and TD Economics project a near zero rate of GDP growth for the first quarter of 2022. The lockdowns utilized around the world are a great tool to increase the money supply, bring down money velocity, and decrease GDP growth. People were paid to stay home and not produce goods and services, and they were turned into savers as they weren't and aren't sure about their future. This is a major problem for established economies because service jobs make up the majority of their employment, whereas developing economies, manufacturing makes up the bulk of their employment. With the global economy shut down partially or even fully for the bulk of the 2 years since the start of the health crisis, the economy is now ripe for stagflation. Both Canada and the US are considered service economies. We don't manufacture most of what we consume, and we're starting to see that become a big problem because both Canada and the United States have record trade deficits with other countries, as we rely more on exports than we do imports. Everywhere I look, I see for lease signs or for sale signs in my city. Granted, there has been new business creation, but it hasn't been enough to keep up with what we've had before the lockdowns. Of course, all these price increases can't be blamed strictly on lockdowns, but we've had supply chain issues across the world for the better part of a year and a half now, as our supply chain model of just-in-time delivery is based on our manufacturing, retail, wholesale, and grocery sectors being dependent on receiving what they need when they need it, as it reduces storage costs and excess product. A lot of manufacturers shut down their operations when the health crisis hit. And unlike currency creation, manufacturing of goods can't just be created with the click of a button or the typing of digits on a screen. It takes time, labor, raw materials, packaging, transportation, marketing, etc., etc., etc. As much as people want to believe that the printing of money will solve all of our problems, it can't. One of the most notable of shortages is the shortage of labor. What is happening right now is called the Great Resignation, as more people exit their jobs to retool their skill set and shift into another field of work, or have left the workforce from limited work availability, or have refused vaccination mandates to work, or even from a wealth effect of seeing their assets rise in value from the bull run we've witnessed in markets from the start of the health crisis. The blockage of the Suez, I don't really know, by the Evergiven ship for 6 days costed roughly $54 billion in trade losses while effectively sending the entire global trade network in disarray. Ports were/are congested and have created longer wait times for ships to be unloaded. A lot of products were lost from being left out on the ocean for long periods of time due to the high humidity of the ocean air. The costs of these losses are then transferred to the consumer. We have a semiconductor chip crisis where our economy has become exceedingly dependent on chips as our worldwide economy becomes more and more entrenched in technology. This is creating a price rise in everything electronic, with the automotive and consumer electronics industries being affected the most. Theft is also up from organized crime as people are getting desperate. All of this ends up being passed on to the consumer for the losses of the inventory. All of these higher prices will result in lower employment, lower production, and a crash of asset prices as most consumers struggle to afford the higher costs and have to sell assets. I'm talking about the overextended housing and stock markets, and especially the crypto and NFT markets. A huge risk I see is another more drastic collapse of the housing market in both Canada and the United States. The US has reached its previous housing market high before the great financial crisis of 2008. While the US's housing market corrected in the last recession, Canada's didn't. Canada's average housing affordability is close to 7 times the average income of a Canadian citizen in a year. Canada is in one of the biggest housing bubbles of all time globally, and the bigger you are, the harder you fall. However, the biggest risk I see is lower oil and gas production, as there has been a lack of investment in the oil and gas sector, and it is now creating less new site discoveries, and the conflict between Ukraine and Russia will more than likely impact Russia's exporting capability of crude and natural gas, as the country makes up 7% of global exports. Russia also produces 13% of the global need for fertilizers. Russia and Ukraine combined account for up to 29% of global wheat exports, 19% of corn exports, and 80% of exports of sunflower oil. The two countries are also major sources of grains, such as corn and barley, that are mainly fed to livestock. Both countries also produce critical raw materials for semiconductor chips. As much as we want to make the shift to green energy, it's just not possible right now to do it all at once. We're too reliant on oil and gas. Oil has now reached over $100 a barrel of oil. When we reach these levels of prices for energy, a recession is not too far off from it. As more people pay more for energy, less money is spent into the real economy, as energy is vital and isn't expendable. This has happened twice, both in the recession of the early 80s and just before the Great Financial Recession. And unfortunately, I don't see prices coming down. From the energy crisis, I believe we will see a crisis in food, because energy is life and we need energy to produce our food. Natural gas and oil are what we use to heat our homes for electricity generation, plastics, diesel, insecticides, clothes, iPhones, detergent, solar panels, fertilizers, etc. Lower oil and gas production means less fuel at higher prices for our transportation of goods or costs to harvest. It doesn't just mean higher fuel costs, it means less urea production for diesel exhaust fluid in semi-trucks, cargo ships, and farming equipment. Urea is also a fertilizer. Ammonia and urea are created from the production of natural gas as nitrogen-based fertilizers, all of which will be passed on to the consumer at much higher prices and lower yields. Not only do I see lower yields from a shortage of fertilizer, I see it also stemming from drier conditions, as last summer had some of the driest weather conditions on record in different parts of the globe. This effect will then trickle down on meat being unaffordable for so many people. It takes roughly 7 kilograms of grain just to create 1 kilogram of meat from livestock. And because of this, I believe crop production will take priority over livestock raising. And if rates can't be raised high enough to combat inflation, which I don't think it will, without the global financial system collapsing upon its own debt, we will see lower and lower GDP growth and much, much higher consumer goods prices as consumers prioritize the basics of life over non-essential items, creating stagflation and possibly deflation. And if the global economy gets so bad to the point of markets seizing up, I believe we will see more central bank buying of assets, including stocks, to prop up the markets, along with more currency creation than ever before to keep the economy going, because nothing drives inflation quite like inflation expectations. This is where people will trade in their currency as fast as they can to lock in prices, because at that point we will have seen monthly, weekly, and daily increases in food and energy prices. And at that point, we will have reached hyperinflation. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that assets will crash in prices, nominal prices, but I do believe they will most likely crash in real prices when adjusted for the rate of inflation. This is called an invisible crash, as the rate of return on your assets can't keep pace with the rate of inflation of the goods you buy all around you. So I want people to consider if those 2 or 3 shares of Amazon, Apple, Google, Tesla, Netflix, if you believe those assets will be able to give you a greater rate of return than the rate of inflation I see coming, please think it through, because I believe a lot of people will be wiped out on what's coming next. So I just want to say thank you for sticking around to the very end of the video. If you haven't already, like this video, subscribe to this channel, as I want to bring more and more weekly content to you guys, because I really love doing this. So please like this, get it out into the algorithm, and I'll see you in the next one.
This is not financial advice. The information contained in this video and the resources used are not intended as and shall not be understood or construed as financial advice. I am not an accountant, attorney, or financial advisor, and the information contained in this video is strictly for entertainment purposes only. Nothing in this video should be considered as a recommendation that one should act upon without proper consultation from a financial professional. I recommend that you seek advice from a professional.